In 1949, a Hollywood director sent 10-year-old Natalie Wood across a bridge he already knew was unsafe. She almost drowned, walked away with a deep fear of water, and 32 years later, her life ended in the water under strange circumstances. Missing money, forced stimulants, blocked education, and adults given way too much access. This wasn't rare, it was routine. Here are 11 shocking things studios did to child stars that would be serious crimes today. They legally drained kids' fortunes right in the open. In 1935, 21-year-old Jackie Coogan walked into a bank expecting to finally touch the money he earned as one of Hollywood's biggest child stars. He was the kid who stole scenes next to Charlie Chaplin, working nonstop since age 7. By 18, he had made $4 million, over $60 million today, from films, endorsements, and live shows. He carried his whole family for years without even knowing it. That money didn't just sit there, it was spent fast. It paid for a Beverly Hills mansion, his mother's luxury fur coats, his stepfather's business deals, and even private school for his siblings. Jackie signed autographs until his hand hurt. He smiled for cameras when he felt like breaking down. He worked while other kids had normal childhoods. Now he was finally an adult, ready to claim what was his. He asked to see his money and the room shifted. The bank manager looked uneasy, shuffling papers, clearing his throat, stalling for time. He adjusted his glasses and told Jackie to sit down. That's when the feeling hit. Something was seriously off. Then the manager turned the ledger around and showed him the balance. The bank account was empty. Not low, not almost gone, completely wiped out, sitting at $0. Jackie stared at the statement, convinced something had to be wrong. He checked the number again and again, hoping it would change. His hands started shaking, the paper trembling as his vision blurred. This couldn't be real. There had to be another account somewhere. He held on to what he'd always been told, that his mother had everything handled, that his money was safe, that he'd be taken care of when he turned 21. But when he looked up, the bank manager slowly shook his head. This was it. The only account, and over the years it had been drained piece by piece, withdrawal after withdrawal, thousands at a time, until nothing was left. The last withdrawal, just 3 weeks before his 21st birthday, his mother and stepfather had burned through nearly everything. Cars, houses, parties, vacations, jewelry, living large without a second thought. This wasn't just money, it was his entire childhood on the line. Long work days, missed school, skipped birthdays, lost holidays, and growing up fast in an industry that treated him like a product instead of a kid. And when Jackie finally confronted them, it didn't go how anyone would expect. No apology, no regret, nothing. His mother didn't even seem to think she'd done anything wrong. Instead, she hit him with a line that would go down as one of Hollywood's coldest statements. No promises were ever made to give Jackie anything. Every dollar a kid earns before his 21 belongs to his parents. She truly believed she was right. In her mind, nothing about this was wrong. Jackie owed her. For giving him life, for raising him, for managing his career. She framed it like she had made sacrifices, and the money was just payment for everything she had done as his mother. To her, she earned it, and he was the one being ungrateful. So Jackie took it to court, suing his own mother. Now it came down to a brutal question. Would the system stand with a young man who had been working since age 7? Who gave up his childhood for Hollywood, or the parent who spent it all without saving anything for him? The 1938 case, Coogan versus Bernstein, exposed a harsh truth. She was legally in the clear. Before 1939, California law gave parents total control over every dollar their child earned. Studios didn't pay the kids, they paid the parents directly, and the children, they had no legal claim to the money, even if they were the ones who worked for it. The court mostly sided with his parents, and out of $4 million, Jackie walked away with about $126,000. That's barely 3% of what he made. And the wild part? Jackie wasn't even the first this happened to. Years earlier, baby Peggy was one of the biggest stars in silent films, a toddler appearing in over 150 films between ages 2 and 6. She brought in around $1.5 million, But her father, a former cowboy and stuntman, controlled it all. By the time she turned 10, every dollar was gone, spent on failed business deals and an over-the-top lifestyle. When her career ended at just 6 years old, the studio cut her loose without a second thought. No goodbye, no safety net, nothing. By age 11, the same child who had earned over $1 million was living in poverty, constantly moving as her family tried to escape creditors. Her life flipped completely. Silk dresses turned into worn secondhand clothes, limousines became long walks, and a toy-filled bedroom became a shared mattress with her sister. And it didn't stop there. At just 7 years old, baby Peggy was pushed onto vaudeville stages, trying to perform for crowds that didn't want her anymore. People booed, calling her too old and washed up at 7 years old. Imagine that, a child labeled a has-been before even hitting double digits. Mickey Rooney faced a similar story, just on a bigger scale. He made around $12 million during his early years at MGM, bringing in huge money for the studio year after year, but just like the others, he didn't control any of it. His father and the studio handled the cash while he kept working nonstop. As an adult, Rooney ended up filing for bankruptcy multiple times. The money he earned as a kid was long gone, spent while he had no legal power to stop it, and this wasn't random, it was designed this way. Studios paid parents directly instead of protecting the child's money in trust accounts. Why? Because once families got used to that income, they wouldn't risk losing it. New houses, expensive lifestyles, steady cash flow. People weren't about to walk away from that, no matter the cost. The backlash from Jackie Coogan's case got so loud that lawmakers had to step in. In 1939, California finally passed the Coogan Law, forcing 15% of a child actor's earnings into a protected trust account. Just 15%. That's all the law protected. Parents could still legally spend the other 85% without restriction. And it didn't even apply to the past, meaning Jackie Coogan, baby Peggy, and so many others got nothing from it. The damage had already been done. Baby Peggy went on to live a long life, passing away at 101 in 2020, but she spent nearly 80 years speaking out, pushing for better protection so other kids wouldn't go through what she did. And the money wasn't the only problem. Studios also put children in real danger. In 1949, a bridge collapsed under 10-year-old Natalie Wood during filming. This wasn't some freak accident either. The crew already knew the mechanism was faulty. Engineers had warned them clearly, saying the system was unreliable and hadn't been properly tested. Still, the director moved forward and filmed the scene anyway. Why would they take that risk? Simple and cold. Real fear looked better on camera. Studios believed that if children were placed in actual danger, their reactions would feel more authentic, and if something went wrong, they would just cover the medical bills, quietly settle any issues, and keep production moving like nothing happened. To them, it was cheaper than slowing down for safety. At just 10 years old, Natalie Wood was filming The Green Promise, walking across a wooden bridge over fast-moving water as part of a dramatic scene. Behind her, special effects were supposed to trigger a controlled collapse, but the truth was ugly. The system controlling that collapse was unstable. The timing was off and the equipment hadn't been properly checked. They knew all of this and still rolled the cameras. The assistant director spoke up, raising concerns that couldn't be ignored. The crew looked tense, exchanging uneasy glances with each other. One crew member even started to say something, then stopped, holding it back. Everyone could feel it twink. Something wasn't right. So the question hung in the air. Would the director pause for safety, or would someone step in to protect a 10-year-old child? The answer came fast. Keep filming. Production was already behind schedule, and every delay meant more money lost. The plan? Do one take and move on. If it failed, they deal with it later. No stunt coordinator, no safety checks, no proper testing, nothing. And still, they sent a 10-year-old out onto that unstable bridge. Then came the call action. Natalie stepped forward carefully, moving across the wooden planks as the cameras rolled. Her white dress lit up in the California sun, and the entire crew seemed frozen, watching closely. For a second, everything looked fine, then it all broke apart. The bridge gave out too early, way too early. Instead of collapsing safely behind her, it dropped right under her feet. Natalie fell straight into the rushing water below. Her scream barely lasted a moment before she disappeared under the surface. She couldn't swim. Panic took over instantly as she struggled, arms flailing, trying to grab anything to stay above water. She went under again, choking as water filled her mouth and nose. She couldn't breathe, couldn't tell which way was up, just darkness, cold, and fear closing in. Her lungs burned as the crew finally snapped into action, shouting and rushing toward the river. By the time they pulled her out, it was almost too late. Coughing, gasping, barely able to breathe. She had been underwater long enough to need emergency care. Natalie was rushed off, shaken and terrified, crying and begging anyone who would listen, "Please don't make me go back, please." It wasn't just fear, it was pure panic after what she had just survived. But the production didn't stop. The moment doctors cleared her, she was sent right back to set. The film had to be finished, and delays weren't an option. Even after everything, Natalie was expected to continue, including more scenes involving water. The studio wasn't about to slow down just because she was scared. From that point on, everything changed for her. Water wasn't just uncomfortable, it became something she feared deeply. Baths triggered intense anxiety. Swimming pools felt overwhelming. The fear ran so deep that people close to her knew better than to even suggest going near water. This wasn't just a bad day on set, it stuck with her for decades. For 32 years, that moment followed her. Everywhere. Every time she got near water, it all came rushing back. The bridge snapping, the fall, the choking, the panic of not being able to breathe. That kind of fear doesn't just fade. What happened next was rare for that time. Her mother actually took legal action against the production company. And the big question was, would Hollywood finally be held responsible, or would it all get buried? She won the case. The court ruled the studio was negligent. But even that came with a twist. The settlement money didn't go to Natalie, it went to her mother. And through all of this, Natalie was still expected to keep working, carrying that fear with her every single day. None of that changed anything for the industry. For 32 years, Natalie lived with a deep fear of water caused by that moment on set. It stayed with her, stuck in her mind, impossible to shake. People close to her knew how serious it was. She avoided boats whenever she could and felt real panic just standing near deep water. She tried everything to get past it: therapy, hypnosis, even gradual exposure. Nothing worked. The fear didn't fade, didn't weaken, it stayed. Then in 1981, at 43 years old, Natalie Wood lost her life in the water under circumstances that are still questioned today. Her body was found off Catalina Island, and years later, in 2011, the case was reopened as potentially suspicious. Think about that for a second. A child who nearly drowned at 10 because a studio ignored safety warnings, who spent decades afraid of water because of that moment, ended up losing her life in the same element that traumatized her in the first place. That connection is hard to ignore. And behind the scenes, studios were tracking all of this like numbers on a page. They kept detailed insurance records, calculating exactly how many child actors got hurt and how much it cost. Every year, they compared injury payouts to the cost of actually making sets safe. The numbers were clear. In 1947 alone, 47 child actors were treated for injuries at major studios, and time after time, the decision was the same: accept the injuries, pay the costs, and keep things moving. Modern safety rules for child actors didn't just appear, they exist because kids like Natalie Wood paid the price with their bodies and mental health. If you're just now learning what really went on during Hollywood's golden age, there's a lot more beneath the surface. And what comes next about the substances given to these kids? It gets even more disturbing. Studios didn't just control schedules, they controlled bodies. Every Monday morning, child actors lined up to be weighed in medical offices on set. And even a 1-pound increase could bring serious consequences. So what happened when a child's body didn't match the studio's ideal? And how early did this start? The answer is harsh. Studios treated these kids like products that had to be managed. Weekly weigh-ins weren't optional, they were enforced. Normal growth, the kind every child goes through, could lead to punishment, suspension, or even losing their contract. Doctors working with studios prescribed appetite suppressants to minors. Kids were praised for being dangerously thin and criticized when they looked healthy. Mickey Rooney dealt with this pressure constantly as a teenager at MGM. Every Monday he stepped on that scale, knowing one number could change everything. The studio wanted him to stay small, youthful, frozen in time. Growing up wasn't part of the plan, so they stepped in and controlled it. Studio staff gave him appetite suppressants to keep his weight down, pushing his body to fit an image instead of letting him grow naturally. During some of the most important years of his growth, everything Mickey Rooney ate was watched and controlled. Every meal, every bite, it all mattered to the studio. He got used to hiding how he felt, even lying about being hungry just to avoid trouble when he felt weak or dizzy. Then one Monday, it happened. The scale showed he had gained 2 pounds, just 2 pounds of normal growth for a teenager. The studio nurse wrote it down, paused, and frowned. Without saying much, she picked up the phone and called upstairs. Mickey stood there watching her quietly speak into the receiver, knowing something serious was about to unfold. Within minutes, things escalated fast. Studio executives called an emergency meeting, and his mother was told to come to the lot immediately. She showed up in under 20 minutes looking tense, gripping her purse tightly. Behind closed doors, they started talking. Not about his health, but about his value. They questioned everything. Should his contract be suspended? Was he still profitable? Was his body changing too much for the image they wanted to sell? Mickey stood outside that room, listening as adults debated his future over just 2 pounds. He pressed closer to the door, hearing every word. One executive said, "We can't have another Andy Hardy picture with him looking like this. The audience expects Andy to stay young forever." Another voice followed, "Maybe we should consider recasting." He was only 14 years old. Standing there, hearing people talk about replacing him like he was nothing, it hit hard. His stomach dropped, his throat tightened, and in that moment, he understood exactly how fragile his place was. Mickey Rooney stood at 5'2" as an adult. Genetics played a part, but he later revealed something deeper. Studios had him on appetite-suppressing medications and tightly controlled his food during the exact years his body needed proper nutrition to grow. Those critical years were managed for image, not health. That damage didn't just disappear. As an adult, he struggled with constant weight swings, never able to build a normal relationship with food. The studio had drilled it into him. Feeling hungry meant you were doing something right, and eating too much meant you failed and deserved consequences. And he wasn't the only one. Elizabeth Taylor faced strict diet monitoring as a young teenager. She was praised when she skipped meals and criticized when her body looked healthy. Natalie Wood dealt with the same pressure during puberty, getting called out for normal weight changes. Even Shirley Temple wasn't spared. Her diet was tracked from early childhood. Studios kept detailed records on every child under contract. Nurses maintained weight charts marking what was acceptable and what wasn't. If a child went outside those limits, the reaction was immediate and harsh. Roles could be reduced, work could be paused, and public embarrassment was used to push them back in line. In some cases, contracts were at risk. The message was clear and harsh. Your natural body wasn't good enough, and your value depended on how you looked. And for many young teens going through normal growth, especially girls, this meant strict calorie limits right when their bodies needed support the most. Growing boys were given chemical appetite suppressants during the exact years their bodies needed real nutrition. Kids as young as 9 were taught something deeply damaging: that hunger was good, eating was weakness, and their natural bodies weren't acceptable. That kind of control didn't just affect their bodies, it reshaped how they thought during some of the most important years of their lives. The impact followed them for years. Elizabeth Taylor's struggles with weight became public and painful, playing out in tabloids for decades. She later connected it directly to the strict control she faced at MGM while growing up. Natalie Wood also dealt with body image issues and unhealthy eating patterns well into adulthood, shaped by those early experiences. And while studios controlled their bodies, they also took something else: education. Baby Peggy starred in around 150 films between ages 2 and 6, earning over $8 million and living a life that looked glamorous on the outside. She traveled, met powerful figures, and lived in luxury. But behind all of that, something critical was missing. In 1944, at 23 years old, a quiet moment exposed the truth. She was out to dinner with a young man who would later become her husband. He handed her a menu, and everything stopped. She stared at the page, her eyes moving across the words, but nothing made sense. The letters blurred together, her face grew warm, her heart racing as she tried to hide what was happening. She shifted the menu, tilted her head, squinted, anything to make it look like she was reading, but she couldn't. Finally, trying to keep it together, she softly asked him to order for her. He thought she was just being polite, letting him take the lead the way women were expected to back then. In 1944, he smiled, thinking it was old-fashioned charm, but that wasn't the truth at all. The reality was much harder to face. What couldn't baby Peggy do that almost every other 23-year-old could? She couldn't read the menu. This was someone who had been famous since age 2, earned over $1 million, traveled the world, and met presidents. And yet at 23, she couldn't read a simple restaurant menu. So how does something like that even happen? At one point, California law required at least 3 hours of schooling per day for child actors. That's already less than what most kids received, but even that minimum was often ignored. Studios hired low-cost teachers willing to work in chaotic, constantly interrupted environments. Those teachers were put in impossible situations. They had to teach multiple kids of completely different ages at the same time, often in cramped trailers, with filming stopping and starting around them. And on top of that, there was pressure to pass every child, no matter what. Because if a child didn't pass, it could slow down production. And if production slowed down, that teacher could lose their job. So real learning took a backseat every single time. Education was the first thing cut whenever filming ran long, which happened all the time. Kids could be kept on set for up to 16 hours while studios claimed they had learning time during breaks. But the truth? Enforcement was weak and real education barely happened. Baby Peggy received almost no proper schooling while filming all those movies. Later in life, as an adult, she had to teach herself how to write from scratch. Imagine being 25 years old, sitting alone at a desk with a children's beginner book, slowly sounding out basic words, struggling through lessons most kids figure out by 6 or 7. That was her reality. Every page was a reminder of what she missed, and it hit hard. She cried during those lessons, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, because this wasn't just about money being taken, it was something deeper. She had been denied the basic skills needed to function in everyday life. The kind of things most people take for granted were suddenly obstacles she had to fight through. Carl Switzer from our gang faced a similar situation. When his career ended at 16, his education was around a 6th grade level. No diploma, no training, no clear path forward. Trying to move on wasn't simple. It was frustrating and confusing. He'd sit there with job applications, staring at questions that didn't make sense to him. Words he couldn't spell, instructions he couldn't fully understand. After a while, he'd just give up, stuck and shut out of opportunities most people don't even think twice about. Mickey Rooney had his own version of this struggle. He could memorize lines instantly and deliver performances like a pro, but when it came to basic math or writing, he needed help. Simple tasks became challenges, and that gap stayed with him. Even Shirley Temple, who later proved her intelligence by becoming a United States ambassador, didn't get the education she deserved during her early years. As a young adult, she had to take it upon herself to learn what she should have been taught all along. Her success came from her own determination, not because Hollywood supported her. If anything, the system worked against kids getting a real education because an educated child star could read contracts, question unfair treatment, and push back on dangerous conditions. That's exactly what studios didn't want. Keeping kids undereducated kept them dependent. It meant they had fewer choices, no clear way out, and no way to fully understand what was happening to them. Many grew up unable to read the contracts they signed, unable to manage their own money, and unable to switch careers when acting jobs disappeared. And then there were the contracts themselves, tight, controlling, and hard to escape. When families started realizing how bad things were, walking away wasn't simple. These agreements were built to keep them locked in. Standard child star contracts ran for 7 years and could be extended whenever the studio wanted. Parents signed them for kids who were often too young to even write their own names. Once locked in, breaking free could destroy a career and lead to serious financial consequences. These contracts were designed to give studios full control while leaving families with almost none. The balance of power wasn't even close. Studios could even loan child actors out to other studios without asking. It was like renting them out, moving them from one place to another based on business deals. The child had no real say, no control over where they worked, what roles they took, or the conditions they were put under. Studios had the power to suspend a child without pay for refusing any role, even if it felt unsafe or too intense. If a kid said, "I'm afraid of heights," or "that water scene scares me," it didn't matter. They could be benched indefinitely. No work, no income, and their contract time frozen like nothing happened. Control didn't stop there. Studios managed every part of a child's public image. Every interview had to be approved, every appearance monitored, every photo cleared before it could be seen. Nothing was left to chance. Everything was controlled, and the working hours, brutal. Kids were pushed through 12, 14, even 18-hour days, sometimes 7 days straight. Child labor laws existed, but studios found ways around them or ignored them completely. Families often stayed quiet because they depended on the income, and the studios knew it. They even controlled how these kids looked. Weight, hair, appearance, it all had to match the studio's vision. Children were told to dye their hair, maintain certain looks, and in some cases, change their appearance just to stay marketable. And if a child stepped out of line, the studio had a catch-all excuse: unsuitable behavior. That could mean anything. Asking for breaks, speaking up about conditions, or pushing back could get labeled as being difficult or unprofessional. At the same time, these young actors were completely locked in. They couldn't work for other studios, couldn't take outside opportunities, and couldn't use their fame to negotiate better treatment. And saying no, that wasn't really an option. Agree to the role or face suspension? They couldn't even negotiate better deals no matter how big they became. Jackie Coogan earned millions, but had zero power to change his contract. Shirley Temple was the top box office star in America, yet she still couldn't push for better working conditions. Fame didn't equal control. It meant staying locked in. Speaking out wasn't an option either. Contracts were packed with strict clauses that silenced them completely. If they talked publicly about mistreatment, they risked immediate termination and even legal trouble. The system wasn't just controlling, it was built to keep them quiet. And when someone finally pushed back, the reaction was instant. When baby Peggy's father tried to negotiate better terms after his daughter had already made the studio millions, the response was harsh and final. They dropped her just like that. No conversation, no compromise, no second chance. At only 6 years old, her career was over because her father dared to ask for fair treatment. The studio didn't try to fix anything. They simply moved on. She was replaced quickly, like she never mattered. And it didn't stop there. They made sure everyone noticed. Her family was effectively blacklisted. Other studios refused to hire her, and producers who once worked with her suddenly had nothing available. The message was loud and clear: ask for more and you lose everything. By the time she was 7, baby Peggy was performing in small vaudeville shows, facing crowds that called her too old. Just like that, a child star at the top was pushed out and left behind. She went from big movie theaters to small vaudeville circuits, then all the way down to county fairs. Each stop felt smaller, more desperate than the last. And this was happening to a 7-year-old child who was already being treated like she was finished. The same girl who had earned over $1 million was now performing for tiny crowds who barely recognized her. Her name, once everywhere, was fading fast. That's how quickly the industry moved on. Mickey Rooney faced a different kind of control, but just as intense. His MGM contract didn't just manage his work, it controlled his personal life too. Who he could date, where he could go, even where he lived, it was all decided for him. The contract made it clear. He lived where the studio said, traveled only when allowed, and could only associate with approved people. His life wasn't his own. It got even more extreme during World War II. When Mickey wanted to serve in the military, MGM pushed back hard. They threatened legal action, arguing that his contract gave them rights over his time, even over his decision to serve his country. Only public pressure and fear of backlash forced the studio to back off, but the message was clear. They believed they owned him. Natalie Wood faced similar control from a very young age. Contracts signed by her mother locked her in starting at just 4 years old. By the time she was old enough to understand, she was already tied to agreements she never chose. And because of that, she couldn't say no, even to roles that made her uncomfortable or anxious. She couldn't even negotiate for better pay despite becoming one of the most valuable stars in the industry. Her mother had signed away her independence before she could even read, and she spent her entire childhood locked into agreements she never chose. Studios didn't just rely on contracts, they kept quiet blacklists of families they labeled as difficult. These weren't written down anywhere official, but everyone knew they existed. Word traveled fast through the industry. If a parent spoke up about safety, they were difficult. If they questioned long working hours, they were unreasonable. If a child hesitated or showed fear, they were called unprofessional. Labels like that followed families everywhere. Once you were on that list, work started disappearing. Casting directors suddenly had no roles. Auditions got canceled without explanation. Calls stopped coming back. It all happened quietly, but the message was loud and clear: stay silent or lose everything. And families saw it happen to others. One day they were successful, the next they were struggling, completely shut out. That fear kept people in line. The contracts created a deeper trap. Families became fully dependent on the child's income. They bought homes, cars, paid for private schools, and supported relatives, all based on that money. So even if they wanted to walk away to protect their child, they couldn't afford to. The system made sure of that. Even when families saw the damage happening right in front of them, walking away wasn't simple. Leaving meant losing their home, their lifestyle, everything they had built. Studios understood this perfectly. Once a family depended on that money, they were far more likely to stay quiet and go along with whatever was demanded. That dependence wasn't accidental, it was part of the system. Keep families tied to the income and they'll stay compliant. That was the reality behind it all. Even parents who truly wanted to protect their kids were stuck in impossible situations. Speak up about dangerous stunts and exhausting hours and risk losing everything overnight. Stay quiet and watch your child go through something harmful. Some believed they were making the best choice by not interfering. Others knew exactly what was happening but felt trapped with no way out. The system forced even caring parents into a position where they became part of the problem because the alternative felt like total financial collapse. And while all of this was happening, something else was being taken: childhood itself. Child actors worked 12 to 14 hours a day, sometimes 6 or 7 days a week, starting as young as 3 or 4 years old. No weekends, no real breaks, no normal routine. There were no birthday parties with friends, no summer vacations, no school dances, no sleepovers, no playground time, no little league or group activities, just work, schedules, and staged moments for the public over and over again. Their only peers were other child actors. But even that wasn't simple. Those kids weren't just friends, they were competition fighting for the same limited roles. Every interaction came with pressure. Getting close to someone could mean losing out on your next job. Real friendship was hard to find in that kind of environment. The adults on set weren't there to be mentors or protectors. They were co-workers focused on production. Their attention was about business, not childhood. Every relationship was watched and judged. Mothers and studio representatives looked at every connection through one lens. Does this help the child's career? If it didn't matter. Genuine, carefree friendship barely existed in that world. Even simple play wasn't allowed. If kids tried to run around between takes, they were quickly shut down. Moving too much could wrinkle costumes. Playing could mess up hair or makeup. Getting dirty could delay filming. So they adapted. Sit still, stay quiet, look perfect, and always be ready. That became the routine. Shirley Temple's 7th birthday shows just how controlled everything was. The studio arranged a big celebration on set. A 3-tier cake covered in pink frosting, cameras ready to capture the moment. She was placed in front of it and told exactly what to do. Smile, look excited, act surprised. Every reaction was directed like a scene in a movie. Flashbulbs went off, lights shining in her eyes as she performed happiness on cue. She could smell the frosting, see the candles waiting, 7 of them. But even in that moment, it wasn't really her birthday the way a child should experience it. Once the photos were done, the moment was over just like that. The cake? Taken away immediately. Shirley reached out for a slice. She was hungry and it was supposed to be her birthday cake. But a studio assistant pulled it back and said, "Not yet, sweetie. We need to keep your dress clean for the next scene." Just like that, even that small moment was denied. There was no real party. No kids her age, no singing, no games, no presents to open. Nothing that actually felt like a birthday. Instead, Shirley went right back to work, filming scenes like any other day. And she never even got a piece of that cake. That was her 7th birthday. A staged moment for cameras, not a real childhood memory. Baby Peggy had her own version of that loss. She once sat inside looking out a window watching neighborhood kids play freely outside. They were running, laughing, getting messy, enjoying life the way kids are supposed to. She could hear them through the glass, the noise, the excitement, the fun. Meanwhile, she sat inside in full costume and makeup, legs hanging off a chair too big for her, waiting for her next scene. She wasn't allowed to join them no matter how much she wanted to. Margaret O'Brien faced the same kind of moment. She asked her mother if she could go to a birthday party for a girl in her neighborhood. A simple request, but it didn't go through her mother alone. Her mother had to check with the studio, and the answer came back fast: no. Saturday was a filming day. Margaret stood by the window in her dressing room watching other kids walk by with presents in their hands, heading to that party she couldn't attend. She counted them one by one as they passed, stuck on the outside of a life she wasn't allowed to live. 7 children walked by, each one holding a brightly wrapped present. She watched them closely, trying to memorize their faces, hoping maybe one day she'd see them again and wave. But that moment never came. She was never invited to another party. That image stuck with her, the presents, the laughter, the life happening just out of reach while she sat there in costume, and it stayed with her for 70 years. Mickey Rooney's childhood moved just as fast, but in a different way. He filmed 16 Andy Hardy movies in only 3 years, working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. That wasn't a childhood, it was a non-stop schedule. Years later, he put it into words that hit hard. "I was a 14-year-old boy for 30 years. I never got to be 14. That says everything. He never went to school dances, never played casual games, never had the freedom to just do something random without asking for permission. Every part of his life was controlled, and that control followed him into adulthood. His 8 marriages weren't just headlines, they reflected something deeper. People close to him said he never really learned what genuine connection looked like, because growing up, every relationship he had was managed, planned and tied to his career. Natalie Wood lived with that same kind of pressure. She started working at 4 and never experienced normal school life. Her friendships weren't just friendships, they were evaluated constantly by her mother and studio reps. Connections that helped her career were encouraged, but simple, carefree friendships? Those were pushed aside. Years later in therapy, she admitted something painful. She never felt like she truly fit in anywhere. She didn't know how to build normal relationships because everything she experienced growing up had conditions attached. Lonely children were easier to control. That was the reality. Kids with real friendships outside the studio might push back, might question things, or even tell others what was happening. But children surrounded only by studio-managed relationships, they had nothing to compare it to and no one to turn to. Many former child stars later described the same feeling, that something important had been taken from them. You can learn skills later in life, sure. You can study, build a career, even go back to school, but you can't recreate childhood experiences, the moments where you learn how to connect, handle conflict, and figure out who you are. Natalie Wood spent years in therapy trying to answer one simple but heavy question. Who am I when I'm not performing? And even after all that time, she never found a clear answer. And while all of this was happening, something even more serious was going on behind the scenes. Studios created environments where children were left vulnerable. In 1940, 12-year-old Shirley Temple was told that MGM producer Arthur Freed wanted to meet with her privately about a role. On the surface, it sounded normal, but it raises a bigger question. Were these children actually being protected? Studios presented themselves as safe, family-friendly spaces, but behind that image, child actors were often sent alone into private meetings with powerful adults. Closed doors, no oversight, no protection. These were men with full control over careers, dealing with children who had been trained to listen, obey, and not question authority. Studio management regularly sent child actors alone to executive offices, treating it like normal routine. At the same time, kids were exposed to piles of fan mail, some of it coming from adults with disturbing intentions. And the studios, they didn't step in to protect them from that kind of attention. The system itself made children vulnerable. They were trained to obey adults, depended on approval for their careers, locked into contracts, and constantly told to be agreeable no matter what. That kind of pressure created a dangerous imbalance of power. Shirley Temple's meeting with Arthur Freed was presented as just another work conversation. Her mother, who usually stayed by her side, was told she didn't need to come this time. The studio reassured her it would be quick, just a simple discussion about a role, so Shirley went in alone. She was 12 years old, dressed carefully in the outfit her mother had chosen that morning. She knocked on the door, heard "come in," and stepped inside. As she entered, the door closed behind her, and then she heard it lock. What happened next left her shocked and confused. She reacted the only way a frightened child might, laughing nervously, trying to process something she didn't fully understand. That reaction wasn't humor, it was fear. A defense response to something overwhelming and wrong, but instead of stopping, Freed became angry. His face changed, his voice raised, and he shouted at her to leave. Get out! Get out of my office! And after something like that, the question becomes impossible to ignore. What consequences did he actually face? Criminal charges? Career consequences? Any real accountability at all? None of that happened. Instead, the response went in the opposite direction. Shirley was the one who faced consequences. She was banned from MGM, accused of not taking the meeting seriously, and blamed for her reaction. A 12-year-old child caught off guard in a situation she didn't understand was labeled as the problem for nervously laughing in shock. Meanwhile, he faced no punishment. Nothing changed for him. The system protected him, and she was the one pushed aside. When Shirley's parents and 20th Century Fox learned what happened, they didn't go public. They all came to the same decision: stay quiet. Speaking out could make her look difficult, damage her image, and risk the family's income. So everything was buried. No statements, no accountability, just silence. And Shirley, she went right back to work, smiling, for cameras, playing the role everyone expected while carrying something no child should have to carry. But the message was clear and harsh. Powerful adults could cross lines, and if you reacted the wrong way, you'd be the one blamed. Arthur Freed stayed right where he was, continuing his career without interruption, and just a few years later, while Shirley was still dealing with the aftermath, he was being trusted with massive productions like Singing in the Rain, backed with huge budgets. That contrast says everything. In 1952, he received one of the highest honors in the industry, the Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award. That's the Academy's top recognition for producers. And that award, it still sits in a museum today with his name on it. Meanwhile, Shirley Temple waited 48 years just to say his name out loud in public. Think about that. Decades passed before she could even speak about what happened. His career didn't slow down, it took off. Awards, recognition, major projects, nothing was taken from him. The industry stood behind him completely. Shirley stayed silent until 1988. By then, he had already been gone for years, and she had carried that experience alone the entire time. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It happens when speaking out feels unsafe. Natalie Wood had her own experience she only shared privately with people she trusted. According to her sister, Lana Wood, their mother was aware and chose not to act. Her career came first. Natalie passed away in 1981 without ever publicly naming the person involved. That truth stayed hidden during her lifetime. And behind all of this, there was another disturbing reality. Major child stars were receiving over 1,000 letters every week. Among them were messages from adults that crossed serious boundaries. Studios went through that mail. They saw it. They knew exactly what kind of attention these children were getting, and still nothing meaningful was done to protect them. Studios understood the risks. They knew these kids were vulnerable. They knew sending them alone into private meetings with powerful adults created dangerous situations, and yet the system kept running like nothing was wrong. Studios kept these practices going because protecting children wasn't their priority. Protecting powerful relationships was. As long as executives were making money, nothing else seemed to matter. And when something inappropriate happened, the pattern was clear. The adults in power were protected. They kept their positions, their influence, their careers. Meanwhile, the children were silenced, blamed, or quietly pushed out. Control went far beyond work. It reached into every part of their personal lives. Take Mickey Rooney, for example. Photos of his first kiss were shared everywhere, presented like a sweet, natural moment, but what people didn't see was what happened just minutes before. Backstage, a studio executive gave step-by-step instructions, where to stand, how to turn, when to move, when to kiss. Neither Mickey nor the girl had ever experienced anything like that before. It wasn't real. It was staged down to every detail, like a rehearsed performance. Mickey's hands were shaking. He didn't know where to look. The girl stood there just as unsure while her mother adjusted her dress and guided her movements. This wasn't a genuine moment. It was something constructed for the cameras. And that level of control didn't stop there. Studios dictated friendships, dating, family time, education, living situations, everything. Even their words weren't their own. Child actors were coached on exactly what to say in interviews and expected to present a perfect image no matter what was really happening behind the scenes. They didn't just control behavior, they controlled reality itself. Spontaneity was rehearsed. Laughter was practiced until it looked real. Stories about their home lives were memorized even when those stories were completely made up. Studios hired publicists to create full fake narratives for magazines. Birthday parties that never happened. Family dinners that were actually staged photo shoots. Friendships that didn't exist at all. These stories went deep. Articles talked about pets the child never had, hobbies they never tried, favorite foods they had never even tasted. It was all crafted to sell an image. Mickey Rooney couldn't even go on a simple date without approval. If he liked someone, MGM would investigate everything about her, who her family was, what her background looked like. Everything was checked. The question wasn't about his feelings, it was about his image. Wood being seen with her help or hurt the brand they built around him. Studios kept files on potential dates and often said no without giving any reason. And if they did approve it, the control didn't stop there. The date itself was planned and watched, where they went, what they did, even whether photographers should show up. It was all managed. Even his emotions weren't fully his own. Showing anger or sadness could damage his perfect image, so he learned to hide it. He trained himself to smile on command, to push down frustration, to act happy even when he wasn't. And the pressure went even further. When Shirley Temple's grandmother passed away, she wanted to cry at the funeral. She was only 8 years old, but even then, she was told no. Publicists warned that photographers might see her, and crying could ruin her image as America's sweetheart. So even in a moment of real loss, she was expected to hold it in and stay perfect. Grief didn't fit the image, so it wasn't allowed. At her own grandmother's funeral, Shirley Temple sat still, holding everything in, performing even in that moment. Every time tears started to come, her mother would squeeze her hand, a quiet warning to stay composed. Only later, back in the car, did she finally cry. Softly, quietly, making sure no one else could hear. Even her sadness had to be hidden. Natalie Wood faced a different kind of pressure, but just as intense. Her mother pushed her toward useful relationships from a young age. By 16, Natalie was being encouraged to date older, established men, not teenagers, but adults with influence in the industry. These connections weren't about feelings, they were about opportunity. Every interaction had a purpose. Every relationship was measured by what it could bring. Her mother even kept track who Natalie spent time with, which connections might open doors, which ones needed to be avoided. It turned something personal into something strategic. Over time, Natalie learned to see people through that same lens. Relationships became transactions, not genuine connections, and the control didn't stop in public. It reached into private life too. Letters were read before they were sent. Phone calls were listened to. Even living spaces were checked. In some cases, children were required to stay in studio-approved housing instead of with their families, giving studios even more control over their daily lives. The message couldn't have been clearer. You don't have a private life. You don't switch off. You are always the product. And for these kids, that line between real life and performance started to disappear. Every conversation, every moment came with a question. Was this real? Or was it being watched and reported back? Was that person a real friend or someone gathering information for publicity? Were their feelings genuine or something they'd been guided to feel? That constant uncertainty blurred everything. During the years when identity is supposed to form, these kids were shaped into whatever adults needed them to be. They didn't get the chance to figure out who they actually were. That confusion didn't just fade away, it followed them into adulthood. Mickey Rooney later said that being told exactly how to kiss someone for the first time affected how he experienced relationships forever. He questioned everything. When he felt something, was it real or something he'd been trained to perform? When he said, "I love you," did it come from him or from years of being coached on what to say? His first kiss, his first date, even early relationships, they were all directed like scenes in a script. So where did the performance stop and where did the real person begin? For him, that line never fully came into focus, and behind all of this, there was another layer that pushed things even further. When child actors were working exhausting 18-hour days for long stretches, studios still expected them to stay energetic and focused. So how did they manage that? The answer was serious and hard to ignore. Studios used medication to control when children stayed alert and when they rested, shaping their energy to fit production schedules instead of their natural needs. Studios pushed production schedules to extremes that no child could realistically handle. Mickey Rooney filmed 16 full Andy Hardy movies in just 3 years. Shirley Temple was making 4 or 5 films every single year at her peak. That kind of output meant long, exhausting days with barely any real breaks. We're talking 18-hour days, 7 days a week, for months at a time, and the truth is simple. Kids aren't built to handle that kind of strain, so when natural limits started to show, Studios didn't slow down. They adjusted the children instead. Studio-employed doctors stepped in with a system. They gave child actors amphetamines to keep them energized and alert during those long shooting days. Then at night, when those same stimulants made sleep nearly impossible, they were given barbiturates to force rest. And then the cycle started again. Mickey Rooney later spoke openly about this in his autobiography. In interviews, he explained how MGM doctors started giving him these substances when he was still a young teenager. It became routine. Stimulants to keep him going through exhausting schedules, then sedatives to knock him out when his body couldn't naturally rest. But even that didn't end the cycle. After forced sleep, waking up was difficult, so they gave him more stimulants to get him moving again, day after day, month after month, year after year, during some of the most important stages of his development. He described how each morning a studio nurse would show up at his dressing room door with a small paper cup filled with pills, ready to keep the system going. "Take these now, Mickey. You've got a long day ahead." That's what he was told. And he followed instructions without question. He was a kid, trained to listen, not to push back. By mid-morning, the effects would start hitting. His pulse picked up, his body speeding up in a way that didn't feel natural. By lunchtime, he was full of energy, but not the normal kind. It was jittery, intense, his heart racing, his hands slightly shaking. Then came the crash. By evening, he'd feel completely drained, but still couldn't sleep. His body was exhausted, but his mind wouldn't slow down. That's when the second set of pills came in. This wasn't occasional, it was controlled and consistent. Studio doctors decided when he was awake, when he slept, how much energy he had, even how he felt day to day. And the most alarming part? This was done without real understanding or informed consent. In many cases, parents weren't fully aware of what was being given. The pills were handed out casually, like it was routine. Take this in the morning, take that at night. And the kids followed directions because that's what they had been taught to do. Decades later, in 2011, at 90 years old, Mickey Rooney sat in front of the United States Congress and spoke about what happened to him. He described how studios controlled him through substances during his teenage years. These weren't harmless treatments. They were powerful drugs given during critical stages of development. He explained how that early exposure stayed with him. The patterns didn't just disappear, they followed him into adulthood. For decades, he dealt with the long-term effects of what started back then. Those small paper cups handed to him as a teenager didn't just get him through filming days, they shaped struggles he carried for the rest of his life. Mickey later made it clear this wasn't just happening to him, it was much bigger than that. Studios had figured out they could use substances to push children beyond their natural limits, and to them it was easier and cheaper than slowing down production. Judy Garland shared a nearly identical experience. At MGM, she was given the same combination, stimulants to keep working, sedatives to force sleep, and this started when she was just 13 years old during The Wizard of Oz. Two major, young stars. Same studio, same pattern. That's not coincidence, that points to a system. This wasn't about one doctor making bad choices. This was something built into how the studio operated. Studios even kept records of what they were giving. But families often didn't have access to those files. Many parents only realized years later what their children had actually been given. What happened to Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland would be taken very seriously today. But back then, it was treated like normal practice, kept out of public view, and the impact didn't just disappear over time. These were critical years for development, and that kind of chemical control affected how their bodies and minds adjusted. Many former child stars later struggled with dependency issues, patterns that started during those early years on set, and when their careers slowed down or ended, there was no real support waiting for them. Take Carl Alfalfa Switzer. Once a familiar face to audiences everywhere, on January 21st, 1959, his life ended at just 31 years old during a dispute over a small amount of money. It raises a serious question. How does someone go from being widely recognized to struggling like that? Because in Hollywood, child star careers don't last forever. children grow up. That's the one thing Hollywood couldn't control. The adorable 7-year-old eventually becomes a teenager, and studios knew this pattern well. They had seen it happen again and again, yet when that shift came, they offered nothing. No guidance, no support, nothing to help with the transition. Once a child stopped being profitable, the connection was cut just like that. Karl "Alfalfa" Switzer is a clear example. Between 1935 and 1940, he was one of the most recognizable faces in the country through Our Gang. Kids everywhere knew him. His voice, his hair sticking up, his off-key singing that made people laugh. He appeared in 61 comedy shorts, entertaining millions. But behind the scenes, the money he earned was controlled by his parents. It went toward the family's lifestyle with the assumption that his success would just keep going. No real plan for the future, no safety net. Then everything changed at 16. The image that made him famous no longer fit. He wasn't the same child audiences remembered. He was just a regular teenager. And in Hollywood, regular didn't sell. Suddenly, there was no place for him. He tried to keep acting, but casting directors couldn't see past the character he used to play. He'd walk into auditions and be dismissed before he even had a chance. Some would shake their heads, others laughed, and some just looked uncomfortable. Despite years of experience, he was shut out of the only career he had ever known. Just like that, he went from being a familiar face everywhere to someone the industry no longer had a use for. His brother Harold later confirmed the truth. Every dollar Karl earned was gone. Their parents had spent it all. By the time he was 16, Karl Switzer had nothing left. No savings, no real education beyond around a 6th grade level, and no skills outside of acting in short comedy films. And the industry that once made him famous, it didn't want him anymore, so he took whatever work he could find. Bartending, where customers recognized him and made harsh comments about how far he had fallen. Working as a hunting guide, breeding dogs, anything to get by. He kept trying to return to acting, but it never worked. He was stuck in the past, typecast as the child he used to be. At auditions, people didn't take him seriously. They laughed, they dismissed him. The same boy who once made the country smile had become a punchline. By his mid-20s, things had only gotten harder. He was struggling financially, dealing with personal setbacks, and trying to survive day by day. The fame was gone, but the impact of that early life stayed with him. Then came January 21st, 1959. Karl Switzer got into an argument over a small debt, about $50 connected to a hunting dog. What started as a dispute quickly escalated. Voices got louder, tension built, and neighbors could hear it happening. In that moment, things turned physical, and the situation ended in tragedy. Karl Switzer lost his life at just 31 years old. A former child star who had once been known across the country, who had earned significant money during his early career, was gone over what amounted to a small sum. His earnings were long gone, his education had been limited, and no real support had been there when his career ended. The system took everything it could during his early years, and when that phase passed, it moved on without him. Karl Switzer never really had a fair shot at a stable adult life. From ages 7 to 12, he was highly valuable to the industry. But after that, everything shifted. From his teens into adulthood, he was left trying to survive on his own, and by 31, his life was over something so small it barely makes sense. Baby Peggy's story followed a similar path. Her career ended at just 6 years old. The moment she no longer fit the image, everything collapsed. Her family went from wealth to bankruptcy almost overnight, and it wasn't just a few cases, it was a pattern. Other Our Gang child actors faced similar struggles. Norman "Chubby" Chaney passed away at just 18. The cycle kept repeating. Early fame, sudden loss of work, no support, and a difficult path into adulthood. Even someone like Mickey Rooney, who managed to keep working as an adult, wasn't spared from long-term impact. He filed for bankruptcy multiple times. Why? Because he was never taught how to manage money. Others controlled everything while he was growing up. Studios saw this happen again and again. They had years of examples showing exactly what would happen to these kids once they aged out. And still, they did nothing, because once the profit stopped, so did the concern, the system included financial exploitation, unsafe working conditions, strict control over bodies, lack of education, binding contracts, loss of normal childhood, exposure to harmful situations, and even chemical control. So with all of that happening, one question stands out: how did it stay hidden for so long? Studios didn't just rely on power, they built full systems to keep everything quiet. Anyone who tried to speak out was quickly shut down. Child star contracts included morality clauses that could be twisted to punish anyone who talked publicly, and if that wasn't enough, there were blacklists. Quiet, unwritten lists that spread across the industry. Speak up, and suddenly jobs disappeared, calls stopped, and doors closed. Studios also controlled the media. Through advertising money, they had influence over what got published. Journalists who tried to tell the truth risked losing access or their careers entirely. Legal teams played their part too. Lawsuits were dragged out, made expensive, and pushed until families couldn't keep fighting. Pressure, delays, and intimidation made it almost impossible to win. And behind the scenes, there were people whose job was to clean things up. Fixers worked to bury stories, smooth over incidents, and keep scandals from reaching the public. The message was clear: speak out, and you won't work in Hollywood again. At the same time, studios pushed out a completely different story. Fan magazines were filled with glowing, carefully approved content. Articles painted child stars as happy, successful, and living perfect lives. Any real stories? They rarely made it through. Editors knew pushing back against studios could cost them too much. Families who complained didn't band together. They were isolated. Each one worried that speaking up would cost them everything. And the imbalance of power made it even harder. Studios had massive resources and legal teams. Families were just trying to protect their children while relying on that same system for income. People did see what was happening. Crew members noticed the long hours, the pressure, the conditions, but speaking up came with serious risks. Others saw what was happening too. Crew members, actors, people around it all, but speaking up came with a serious cost. Challenging the system didn't just risk your job, it could end your entire career. Look at when survivors finally felt safe enough to talk. Shirley Temple spoke about Arthur Freed in 1988. That's 48 years later, and only after he was gone and couldn't respond. Mickey Rooney didn't share his experience publicly until 2011, when he was 90 years old. By then, the studio system that controlled him was long gone. Baby Peggy began speaking out in the 1970s, again after that system had already collapsed. That timing isn't sluchai. It shows how much power the system had. Speaking out earlier could have meant losing everything: work, reputation, financial, stability. Waiting wasn't weakness, it was survival. They spoke when the risk was finally lower, when the people involved were no longer in power, when the structure had changed, when there was less to lose, and when they did speak, it mattered. Their voices helped push changes that protect child actors today. Baby Peggy spent decades advocating for stronger protections. Mickey Rooney took his story all the way to Congress. Shirley Temple naming what happened helped break years of silence. But it leaves a bigger question hanging. If it took decades for these stories to come out, what might still be hidden right now? What could still be going on that hasn't been revealed yet? Which part of this story stood out to you the most? And what other Golden Age Hollywood stories should we dig into next? Your suggestions help shape what we uncover next. Because these stories aren't random, they point to something bigger. These weren't isolated incidents, they were patterns. 11. Different practices used across the industry affecting child star after child star. From stolen money to intense control, from unsafe conditions to powerful adults being given access, this system was built to take as much as possible from children while giving almost nothing back. Every protection that exists today came at a cost. Kids like Jackie Coogan, Baby Peggy, Mickey Rooney, Shirley Temple, Natalie Wood, and Carl Switzer paid for it with their childhoods, their health, their futures, and in some cases, their lives. Baby Peggy didn't just move on, she spent nearly 80 years speaking out, pushing for change and trying to make sure others wouldn't go through what she did. She lived to 101, passing away in 2020 after dedicating her life to that mission. Jackie Coogan didn't recover what was taken from him, but his case led to the Coogan Law, something that has helped protect countless young performers from the same kind of financial loss. Shirley Temple's decision to finally speak up helped break a long-standing silence and encouraged others to come forward too. Mickey Rooney, even at 90 years old, took his story to Congress, helping bring attention to ongoing issues and giving a voice to people who had stayed quiet for years. These stories aren't just about loss, they're about pushing back against a system that took advantage of them and forcing change that still matters today. What they went through wasn't meaningless. It forced change. Not perfect change, not complete protection, but real progress that still matters today. Now, when we watch those old films, it hits differently. The performances are still powerful, but there's a deeper understanding of what it costs to get them. It's not just about talent anymore, it's about what those kids had to go through behind the scenes. And their stories don't end there, because years later, many of them found the strength to speak out, turning personal pain into something that could protect others. They deserve so much more: safety, education, fair pay, real childhoods, and a chance to grow into adulthood without being used. Instead, the system failed them again and again, all for profit. But even with everything stacked against them, many still found a way forward. Some became advocates, pushing for better conditions so future generations wouldn't face the same treatment. Others stepped away from the spotlight completely, finding peace outside the industry that shaped their early lives. And that matters, because their survival and their decision to finally tell the truth stands as proof that the system didn't fully break them. The best way to honor them is simple. Don't forget what happened and don't ignore the warning signs when similar patterns show up again. Real change comes from paying attention and pushing for better protections, supporting reforms, speaking up, and making sure new generations understand one thing clearly: profit should never come before the safety of children. If this changed how you see Hollywood's golden age, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with others who grew up watching these stars, because they deserve to know the full story. These children fought to be heard. The least we can do is make sure they're never forgotten. If you made it this far, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. It really helps more people see these stories. This is Golden Age Files, where we uncover the stories that were hidden behind the spotlight. These weren't just Hollywood legends, they were real kids who deserved protection and never got it. We remember their work, we respect their strength, and we keep talking about it so history doesn't repeat itself. I'll see you in the next video.